Countess Leslie was on the verge of becoming fanatical. When was the last time her grace was this imposing? Such demeanor! Even 1,000 years ago he was not this grand.
Yes, follow me. We will wrap you in your divine garbs and proceed to your throne.
As Leslie quickly walked through the maze-like halls, Jack recalled the expression of Leslie.
Was Countess Leslie an AV actress in her past life?
This was the second time Jack questioned this. Her expression had the appearance of pure ecstasy. It was rather improper. Finally, Leslie stopped and stood to the side of a large double-door room, as usual, made of ivory bones. But this time, it was embellished with basketball-sized gold sensors, actually embedded into the doors. These sensors were approximately chest-high to Jack and were spewing a thick white smoke that gave off a mysterious feel. With the doors opening at his approach, Jack walked tall into the room, where waited the handmaidens of Countess Leslie.
How long have they been waiting here?
Jack wondered. Jack walked to the middle of the room. This was a large dress-room line with glowstones on all the walls, with a large mirror wall to the right was the exit. This exit looked grander than the door he just entered. Jack assumed this lead to the throne room. Jack called to Leslie behind him without looking.
Have your servants been waiting here the entire time?
Jack asked.
No, I only called them a few minutes ago.
Leslie softly replied as she stood by the side. Her handmaidens were preparing Jack's mighty vestments. The handmaidens stripped Jack of his current robes. He stood in the center of the room in just his slippers and held out both arms, straight from his body, forming a T-shape. Oddly enough, Jack didn't feel uncomfortable being nude in front of not just Leslie, but all her servants. The handmaidens scurried back and forth carrying various items to be placed on the Holy Witch King. On his neck was placed a heavy gold chain with a gold crest of Daegoth, a half skull with a golden halo. With fingers stretched out, rings were placed one by one on each finger, each with a different meaning and different purpose. In a practiced method, the handmaidens placed Jack's hooded vestments upon him, followed by his sash that cinched his robes above his hip bones. Lastly, 4 maidens carried over his massive shoulder pauldrons with a slowed pace and gently placed them on Jack as Jack's knees bent ever so slightly at the increased weight. Jack dropped his arms as he turned to look into the mirrored wall on his left. This was the first time Jack had clearly seen his own reflection. Standing a full 2 heads taller than Leslie, he gazed at his own reflection. Out of the black hood, he stared back at himself with a pair of golden, wisp-like eyes. They stood out in the inky darkness of his hooded vestment like the eyes of a monster. On each shoulder held large gold half-skulls chained to his pauldron's etch, with black runes that glowed. From their upper jaws came purity seals, written with holy words of power. Jack's robes showed white over black, with gold trim. From his hood flowed down 2 long remnants on each side. Like his robes they were white, but trimmed in black with gold runes. At the end of these remnants were the crests of Daegoth. As Jack admired his appearance, that definitely fitted a final game boss. 4 other handmaidens carried over an ark. They opened it, and Jack marveled at the finely crafted staff that laid within it. This was the femur ferula, the rod of the Holy Witch King. It had the appearance of femurs attached end to end, to provide the length of 7 feet. The top of the staff ended with a half skull, and, like Jack's shoulder pauldrons, its mouth issued along ancient scrollwork purity seal down a quarter way of the rod. A gold halo adorned the top of the skull, and upside-down angel wings on the left and right of the skull. This was a 3D version of the crest of Daegoth.
They say clothes make the man. Today I've seen vestments make the undead.
Jack couldn't help himself. At last, two handmaidens brought his formal shoes. Jack stepped out of the ones he wore as he stepped into these new ones, truly like slippers. These shoes were white with black soles. Jack happened to notice that these shoes felt like they corrected his feet. They were padded in the arch and heel to provide a better walk and stance.
Undead footwear account for not having flesh. That's actually impressive.
Jack took another look in the mirror.
I make this look good.
This might have been the first time Jack felt vain. He looked to Leslie. Countess Leslie, who was standing quietly by the side, marveled at her grace. It had been a long time since she had seen her grace in full regalia.
I think it's time I pay a visit to my throne.
Jack walked imposingly to Leslie and looked down on top of her. Leslie looked up and felt this was actually the first time since her grace's reawakening that he actually looked at her. Leslie gave a nod.
Yes, I have already called for court to be held. Everyone should be there by now.
When the Holy Witch King called for court, who would dare to be late? Every undead official would drop what they were doing and haul themselves at the fastest possible speed. Some of the undead officials were in the middle of pleasurable encounters with their spouses or harems, but ripped themselves away at the first mention of court. Some of them didn't even have time to bathe before arriving in droves. One has to remember that court was a huge deal. Besides the Grand Minister of the clergy and his 7 archbishops, there were 7 state officials, 7 war officials, and 14 noble officials. Then surrounding the throne room's court were the open stands. Any low-ranking official could attend the open stands. The stands could hold up to 1,000 low-rank officials. The last court was held over 1,000 years ago, when the Holy Witch King called to session. As only he could do this, not even the Grand Minister could call court or session. Since then, they, the undead officials, only held conferences to discuss worldly affairs. The Holy Kingdom of Daegoth had an interesting government, unlike any other undead kingdom, unique in the fact that it could be ruled by either the Holy Witch King or by representatives. When the Holy Witch King was among the undead, he would rule over the country and state, but when the Holy Witch King was asleep or could not be disturbed, the houses of officials ruled. There were 2 houses of officials. The first house was comprised of the 7 archbishops and 7 state officials, with the Grand Minister presiding, known as the House of Unlife. Its officials, consequently, known as officials of Unlife. The second house was comprised of the 14 noble officials, made from the 7 major clans and the 7 minor clans of the kingdom, with 1 elected marquis presiding, picked from the 14 noble officials. Interestingly enough, they were known as the officials of Undeath. Day-to-day affairs and general governance were completed by these 2 houses. The officials of Unlife would propose laws and plan. It was the officials of Undeath that would either approve or veto the proposal.
Has everyone made it to my court yet?
Jack watched as Leslie's handmaidens left quietly. Leslie took a few steps forward and looked into the mirror at herself and spoke softly.
Not yet. Please forgive them. It has been a full 7 days since you awoke. They waited but became impatient, so they went home.
7 days? How long was I in the study?
What Jack didn't know is that time is relative. Time to him is short, but to others very long. For example, Jack mulled over his situation while laying in his evening tomb for 2 days and spent 5 days in his study. This didn't mean he was slow, just his concept of time. This was like when you're at school or work and you feel like an hour has passed. In reality, it was only 15 minutes. Jack didn't want to walk to his throne and wait for these tryhards to file in one by one. He walked behind Leslie and placed his hands on both her shoulders slowly, much in the manner a villain does with a proposal. Leslie became stiff. She looked back up at the mirror and saw her grace loom behind her. This was the second time her grace ever touched her, and this time he initiated it. She was beyond shocked.
Even without his memory, I've never known my dear to be so touchy.
But a small voice in her heart spoke out
I want more.
before quietly disappearing from her thoughts.
Leslie,
Jack said. Leslie shuddered at her name being called.
Yes, my dear.
what is your position in the court?
Leslie thought for a moment and concluded that Jack must have forgotten a lot of things, and this was a normal question.
While I'm a countess of our city of Saigunray, I am unofficially your direct handmaiden.
Leslie searched for the right words to say about how she had direct contact with him, considering the fact that no other count or countess could speak to the Holy Witch King first without permission. Even a duke would have to send a request for an audience.
You hold no official title besides a countess.
Jack spoke while thinking.
So she isn't my wife, concubine, or girlfriend.
No.
Leslie spoke with a bitter smile. Jack saw this bitter smile in the mirror. Jack thought he could wait to see how being the Holy Witch King played out before picking an advisor, but he really needed someone that knew what was what. Most importantly, he needed someone loyal. He could wait to find a better partner, but considering he couldn't bone, what difference did it make? Besides, as far as looks go, Leslie was beautiful, even for being undead.
I will fix that.
Jack spoke aloud. Leslie didn't reply. She just stood there looking at the mirror. Her mind was completely blank, a dull expression on her face. Jack was never really good at interacting with anyone, let alone women. He was totally counting on Leslie being into the Holy Witch King for this to work. So he played the part of a king kidnapping a woman for his harem. Jack really read too much fiction in his last life. It was also a good thing that this was exactly what Leslie wanted. A while passed, Jack's hands still resting upon Leslie's shoulder. How? Leslie finally mustered the mental ability to speak.
Leslie, can you be completely loyal to me,
I always have, and always will.
even when the world is my enemy and my people turn on me? Can I count on you?
If the world is your enemy, it is my enemy. If your people turn on you, they turn on me.
Jack was surprised at this response. This sounded exactly like something from one of his novels he read.
Good, good, good.
Jack spoke 3 goods. Leslie took notice of this.
What exactly is my dear going to do?
Leslie's mind had finally come back from its holiday. She had answered all of Jack's questions unconsciously. Jack didn't know this, of course. Jack took his hands off her shoulders and turned to walk to the room's side door. This door was even grander than the one he entered, covered in gold-trimmed bones, with 7 censers.
I believe everyone should be there now. Anyone that is late, grant them a true death.
Jack spoke decisively. Leslie quickly turned to look at her Grace's back. She was speechless. This was the first time her Grace said something like this. The Holy Witch King was known to be very merciful to his people, almost pacifistic, but ruthless to his enemies.
What does my grace know that I don't?
Leslie thought inwardly.
That sounded so freaking awesome.
Jack just handed down a cruel edict without thought. It is very thankful that all the officials had indeed made it. Jack would have been surprised to find that just a casual word from his would change or end someone's unlife.
It's time, Leslie. Let me sit on my throne once again.
Jack spoke. Thankfully, in the Holy Book, Jack absorbed was basic knowledge on the workings of the court. He felt confident he could role-play his way through. Leslie stood behind him with her eyes closed. Jack thought she was mentally preparing. Leslie was actually sending telepathic instructions to the palace servants to light the censers and announce the Holy Witch King. Soon, dense, white smoke started to pour from the censers, and the doors slowly opened. Jack strode forward with his femur ferula in hand, marching into the blinding smoke, his massive form disappearing within, followed by Leslie close in tow.